Hello, BookTube, and this is week 15, part 1 of the Future History Project. And this week is the novella or extended short story Bicentennial Man by Isaac Asimov. This is the collection Bicentennial Man and Other Stories. The movie edition, as you can see, with Robin Williams. It's a Columbia Pictures, directed by Christopher Columbus. And it was originally put out in book form. Um, let's see, 1976 actually was released. This is a 2000 edition by Millennium. Now, the good thing, this is also the story is also in the Complete Robot. But when Isaac Asimov collected his stories together to put in a single volume, he would a lot of times put notation, like he would note, he would have a little description of something to do with the writing or the history of the story or something like that, which is actually quite interesting most of the time. But this week is a little different because we got the short story slash novella, and then later Robert Silverberg turned it into a novel. So the part two will be the novel, The Positronic Man, as it was called. Now, Asimov goes into this little introduction here, the notes about how this story came to be and what happened to it. And he says it's sort of is a rather sad history, he says, because in January 1975, Naomi Gordon approached him to write a story for an anthology that was going to be entitled The Bicentennial Man. And that was to be published in 1976, the bicentennial of the American, this is 1776. So, and it was to gather a whole bunch of authors together and write on that theme. And by sounds of it, not necessarily had to be science fiction, but Asimov had an idea. His remit was for 7,500 word story, but he actually wrote 1,500 words, or 15,000 words, so 7,500. So he wrote 15,000 words, but he didn't charge anything extra, and he got, I think, how much did he get here? The deadline was April 1st, 1975. By March 15th, he had finished the story. And he wrote an apologetic letter about the length, but he didn't charge extra, and he got, forget now, I thought it did say here how much he received for it, but I can't quite see it here. But it was going to be the volume was going to be edited by Forrest J. Ackerman, a fan, like, it's called well-known science fiction enthusiast, as Asimov calls him here. Yeah, sorry, I'm still trying to see. I was sure that it didn't charge extra for it, but I thought it did say how much. But he might have stopped saying how much he received for items. But anyway, he received half. He received it all on submission of the story. But then a little while later, there was problems which he didn't know about this. That the Naomi Gordon got ill. There were other problems with editing. Authors either didn't submit their works, or they submitted stuff that didn't work. They didn't follow the remit, and later Judy Lynn Del Rey asked Asimov if he had anything, because she knew that he did this. He had written the story because she knew what was going on in science fiction all over the place. So she asked, well, how come you wrote this story for this anthology, but you never have time to write something for me? I want to see this story. Send me a copy. And then he's saying, well, he sort of hummed and hawed a little bit, and he said, and then she asked, like, how about my suggestions about a robot that has to choose between buying its own liberty and improving its body. I thought you said that was interesting. And Asimov sort of, went, oh my goodness, I included something of that sort in this story. And she just sort of went ballistic and says, I want to see this story. And so he got her a copy of it, and she read it, and she comes back and says, I really tried hard not to like this story, but I can't. Get it back. I want to publish it. Get it back. Uh, but he says, well, it's already sold. It's already done. But she says, well, that like she knew that the anthology was never going to come out. So Asimov asked, and yeah, he got it back. He paid back the full amount. He didn't want to cause any more financial hardship that they were already going through. So it was sent to Judy Lynn, and it was in an anthology of originals entitled Stellar Science Fiction number 2, which appeared in February 1976. And she changed little bits of it for that, and she wanted him to keep it when it went in here, but he didn't. He kept his original story for this. Uh, and then, like, yeah, he says here, he says, incidentally, after this book was put together, Judy Lynn suggested I change my manuscript to make it jibe with the version in Stellar. Apparently, she had introduced numerous minor changes that improved it, she said. Well, I'm not Harlan Ellison, so I don't mind, but I think that in my own collection, I'll let the story stand as I wrote it. Judy Lynn will be annoyed, but she can't do worse than kill me. Her and Lester Del Rey were really close friends of his. So, and there was jokes going back and forth at various times. But anyway, it is about a 50 page story. It's about a robot called Andrew, but it's NDR. And it seems to be sort of a little over almost 200 years after sort of the death of Susan Calvin, because that's mentioned, that's sort of the area around it where it is, where part of it is up to maybe 300 years or so after. But he's just sort of a servant, like a butler type for a family called the Martins. And as you find out in the story, there was a bit of a mix-up because the U.S. robots and Mechanical Men never sell their robots. They lease them out, and then they recall them and upgrade them and so forth. But somehow, due to a clerical error, Andrew was sold to the family, the Martin family, so they owned him. And he did all these minor jobs, cleaning up, butlering and so forth. And there was some children. He called the Mr. Martin Sir, and there was a little girl he called Little Miss, and then there was Miss, uh, and Little Miss came to him one day and wanted something, because there was an ivory carving that she wanted, but she couldn't get it by the sounds of it. So she took a little piece of wood to him and said, "Can you, ordered him to carve this into something so she could wear on her necklace." So he did this, and he made something very beautiful and very intricate. And the Little Miss showed it to her father, and he couldn't believe that he thought she was lying, that Andrew had made this. She calls him Andrew. It's NDR is the nomenclature that Asimov uses. Uh, but he confronts Andrew and says, you know, did you do this? And he said, yeah. And so he gives him another piece of wood and says, carve something with this. And he gets him some other carving tools. Do whatever you want. And he's amazed at the artistry that Andrew used for this. So he stopped him doing all his chores, and he was making furniture, carving all this stuff. and and they're being offered money for it, and the little girl says, well, they should sell it, and she says, well, and her father says, well, we don't need the money, and she says, no, it's for Andrew. So they work out something that half the money goes to Andrew. He opens up a bank account for Andrew. Half goes in there, and half goes into his account. And so he's doing this full time, and people are falling over themselves to buy this stuff, and it's very expensive. So soon Andrew gets, like he becomes rich, like he's got over $600,000, and but there's changes he wants, like he wants certain changes to his body. Well, what he wants to do is he wants to buy his freedom with the money, and Mr. Martin is a little concerned with this, but he eventually does. He buys his freedom, and he gets his freedom from the because Martin had originally bought Andrew, so therefore he's buying his freedom from Andrew. I mean, from Mr. Martin, but they had to go through the U.S. Mechanical Men and so forth as well. So he's because he wants to be free, and as time goes on, he starts doing other things, like he makes a lot of money with his carving and everything, and he decides, like, he wants to become more human. There's a desire in him to become human, to become more human. So when Mr. Martin dies, he starts wearing clothing over his robot body, and he decides that he wants to learn more about humans. So he decides, okay, I'm going to go to the library and see this. But he meets some like young thugs that, had heard that he bought himself, his freedom and all this, and started ordering him to do things, and we're going to start ordering him to dismantle himself. And the son of Mr. Martin comes and sees this, and doesn't like this, and Andrew decides to, like, he wants to create something, a law that prevents people doing this and using the laws of robotics to abuse a robot. So they go to court and they spend a lot of money to this, and they get a sort of token law done for this. So, but Andrew feels that he's, making a few steps forward all the time. And but he wants to learn about things, and he wants to write a history of robots, not U.S. Mechanical Man or something like that, but he wants to write a history of robots. But he comes up with a problem that he can't get information from the U.S. robots and mechanical men, but was able to get a lot of information of Susan Calvin, because he feels like he actually knew her because of the information in what he wrote. He wrote this book, and it made him a lot of money as well. But U.S. Mechanical Men and robots and mechanical men don't like him, nor the lawyer firm that is representing him, because they figure it's bad for their business and bad for robots for this to happen. So, but Andrew, well, he goes by now Andrew Martin. He takes the family's name, and he decides that he wants a human form body, not a mechanical body anymore. So he goes to the U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men and says, you can do this, can't you? And they say, yes, but we're not going to do this for you. So, and they sort of, with the lawyer, they sort of bully U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men in doing this, creating him a flesh sort of body, but with his positronic brain, and not changing the brain. So, he finishes his, he's finished his book. He's doing other things, but now he's got this body, but he wants to, and it's still being powered though by by nuclear power. So he wants to do it sort of more organically, like humans do. So he creates a system. He becomes a robobiologist, he says, not a psychologist, but he wants to work for the body of the robot. So he creates these prosthetics for himself, but also as a byproduct of that, they can create prosthetics for humans. New livers, new eyeballs, new everything like this. So he goes back to U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men and says, "I've got this patent. I have patented this. It should work. I can create a company to do it myself, but it'll hurt U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men. But I'm willing to let you have this as well, as long as you do this for me. And if it works, then you get the patents." So he works like this for many years, for decades, doing this and helping and making prosthetics. He goes to the moon and lives there for a while because of the different gravity. It takes different prosthetics. And it's making humans live longer. But again, U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men are concerned about this because he's becoming too independent. So U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men have changed their kind of robots. The robots that are going to be out and about don't have brains. It's going to be a huge multivac type computer that will run individually, and that's sort of the future there, because they don't want robots to be like Andrew. So it continues on, but he's got this desire to be human. So he tweaks everything more, like having facial features and be able to mimic um, facial features. But he wants to, and then he finds out that the last thing, he wants to be legally called human, even though many do ipso facto, sort of, as a knee-jerk reaction of what he does. They treat him as human, but he wants a legal standing for this. So he spends millions and millions of dollars in court cases to do this. And they try to all things, saying, well, he doesn't have, he's got a mechanical heart and all this, but he's going, well, with his prosthetics, there's humans out there with mechanical hearts, so are they not human anymore? So that gets it. But then there is one thing, it's the brain, the positronic brain, and that's the difference. So they're using that as the cudgel to say, no, we cannot call you human. And he fights for this, but in the end he decides to change it, because he said the difference is the brain dies and the human dies. So because he has all these sort of organic connections to the positronic brain, he gets a doctor, and this is sort of almost against the third law of robotics as well, to harm himself. So he will die, and he's judged it, so he will die as the Bicentennial Man at 200 years old. So he finally, on almost his deathbed, he gets the legal right to be called human, and then dies. It's an interesting story. Asimov calls it a pathos story, because as the previous one that was sort of written is that thou art mindful of him, is sort of a little more on the Frankenstein complex, and then this one's pathos. And it's interesting because it's sort of fits in, because there is this trend as time goes on in the robotic, the Susan Calvin universe, that robots are being let more onto Earth under certain circumstances. But then at the end of this one, it's sort of they are being moved off the Earth again at the time, and this is like 300, 400 years after Susan Calvin, like about 300 years or so after Susan Calvin. And this is way before, Caves of Steel, like thousands of years before. And it's interesting because this was written in 1976, and like there's the whole, like his whole thing, he wants to be human rather than he is better than you, like, more physically, more mentally better than a human, and he'll live. He could potentially be immortal, but he doesn't want that. He wants to be human. And it's an odd thing, and it's interesting that if this was written today, I wonder what the sensibilities for this would be with 21st century sensibilities, where it would be turned, the tables would be turned, and saying that it's not right for him to, because he's being oppressed by humans, to be forcing to be doing something else that's not his true nature. um it's an interesting thing of when it was written, because today I think it would be written very different. There would be this, that he's not allowing the evolution of robots, because, like, the humans have, out in this universe of the Susan Calvin universe, are dictating the evolution of the robots. And then, but we do glimmer in things like, that thou art mindful of him, that robots might decide to evolve on themselves. And then there is that, the car hunters of the concrete prairie, by Robert Sheckley, that talks about, that the ship ends and goes off into space to do, to allow the robots to evolve on their own, away from humans. And it's just because, well, the reason why I say this is because, like, with gender and everything today and all this kind of thing, um it's it would, I'm sure it would be a different ethos for this story, and it would change the whole, the whole, not theme, I can't think of the word, but the whole thrust of the story, that he feels proud of being human. And nobody's really saying, like, there is sort of saying that, well, actually, you're better than human, why don't you stay this, rather than saying that he's being, you know it's sort of a cultural not appropriation, but forcing him. Humans are, it's like he's the victim of this, of humans, rather than him wanting to emulate humans like he does in there. Anyway, it's an interesting thought that, if it was written today, it would either be viewed totally different, or it would be written very differently. Maybe not by Asimov, but somebody else. And also, I wanted to say that the way that Andrew Martin is portrayed in the story of the Bicentennial Man is very much how Clifford Simak uh, describes his robots, as very loyal, and wanting to emulate humans, and getting a pleasure from helping and serving humans, because that's what they're sort of built in to do. And this is very much so in Positronic Man, in Bicentennial Man. So it's a good story, and I wanted to get this done sooner than later, the video, because I want to start reading the novel, and I didn't want to read the novel and then get confused at the storylines. So I'm recording this early, and then I'm going to post it on Friday. I think it should be out on Friday. But anyway, any thoughts of anybody else who's read this? What do they think about the sensibilities? That's the good word. Sensibilities in this, from the 70s to being written today, with him wanting to be human. It's an interesting thing. It would definitely change, I'm sure. Anyway, take care, BookTube. I'll see you next time.